Croeso. Welcome to Britainshiddenhistory. Me, Ross Prawstock. Slightly different today because I was reading The Riddle of the Earth by Comyns Beaumont, who we mostly talk about because of his different views on British history. But something which seems been forgotten somehow is that he was also one of the forerunners of Catastrophism and the fact that the Earth's history is a series of major cataclysms and massive events, rather than the gradualism usually see portrayed. Velikovsky published all that sort of 20, 30 years later, and everyone knows Velikovsky, no one knows about Comyns Beaumont, which is really weird. And what struck me as a strange one is the weather, because obviously there's a lot of conversation about the weather at the moment, extreme climate events, heat, all that kind of stuff. And reading the foreword of this, written in 1925, it struck me as fascinating how some things have never changed, really. So I'm just going to read directly from the book, the foreword, from The Riddle of the Earth, Comyns Beaumont. During the past year, 1924, it may have struck many people besides the writer that there was something unaccountably wrong with the weather over almost the whole of Northern Hemisphere. Particularly was it the case in Western Europe where, if blessed by the Gulf Stream, the countries contiguous to it, in Great Britain and Ireland in particular, seem to be the dumping ground of all the rain and wind and general depression which the Gulf Stream seems to be able to collect. There was not only no sunshine fit to mention, there were thunderstorms, fitful, sudden and dangerous throughout the year. There was a tremendous hurricane during the first days of September, and the year 1924, dishonoured and cordially disliked, went out on the wings of a series of astonishing gales and floods. The weather is a subject we all discuss. Even a stiff and canny Scotsman will wax eloquent on the question of the weather. Nor is it surprising, since vast interests are wrapped up in the incidence of weather conditions. Crops may never ripen if there is no stable weather. Livestock fails to thrive, languishes and gets diseased. Shipping and transport are affected. Public arrangements are upset. Not only, indeed, are agriculturalists and producers of almost all commodities hit hard by incessant bad weather, but the whole life of the community is thrown out of gear. As these words are being penned, great areas in the Thames Valley and elsewhere are flooded, and the destruction is enormous. Any question of meteorological observation is to be made. The commercial centre of the world and the greatest seat of the greatest population is on either side of the white races, is on either side of the Atlantic Ocean. Must remember this is written in 1925, okay? Most of the world's cereals, meat, cotton and manufacturers as yet come from either side of that vast circumfluous ocean's lands, and likewise that same region is cursed with the most eccentric, inconsistent and unreliable weather conditions in the world. The United States and Canada experience greater extremes of heat waves or cold blasts than is usually the case in the British Isles, owing probably to the action of the Gulf Stream, which has a habit of conducting one disturbance after another to these shores. In spite of the importance of the subject, the astounding fact remains that we do not seem to know anything really about the causes which affect the weather. Expensive weather bureaus and meteorological offices are maintained at the public expense, and they tell us that a disturbance is on the way. They station agents in the Azores, at St. John's, Newfoundland, and elsewhere to report. Sometimes they are right, and often they are not. None of these experts appear to possess the slightest knowledge of the initial causes which operate to produce sudden and violent disturbances of the elements. Presumably they are aware that both air and water are condensed gases. But why air and sea exist is one of those matters people take for granted, although the moon is a planet and has neither. There is reason to suppose that the oceans and seas are gradually increasing in volume. Where is the water coming from? Nay, where does it all come from? We are expected to believe that the lands on the Earth's surface have been thrown up at different periods from a molten interior. But can it scarcely be maintained that all the water of these oceans, of all oceans, and seas and lakes and rivers, was also ejected in this manner? and that they have provided us with our needs ever since that day some millions of years ago. Where did all the water come from that was loosened over most of Europe between December 26, 1924 and January the 3rd, 1925? A series of astounding gales in which millions of tons of water were flung down upon millions of square miles of land and sea. The meteorologists do not tell us that. They probably do not think it is their concern. But if they knew more about the causes of weather disturbance, it would perhaps enable them to assist the people on the either side of the Atlantic, instead of the Meteorological Office being, as at present, more a joke than anything else. The vast gale or series of gales which began with no premonitory warnings on December 26, 1924, and continued until January the 3rd, 1925, indicated that somehow there had been introduced into our atmosphere vast quantities of hydrogen and oxygen which had condensed. Those who have studied meteors and aware of their constituent qualities were supplied with a solution to the mystery when it appeared that in Rome, on about December 26, a great meteor had been observed flashing past the Earth. It was estimated to have been as big as the Moon and very nearly struck the Earth. British astronomers remained quite unaffected by this announcement. Greenwich Observatory, when interviewed, doubted the accuracy of the alleged size of the meteor, and apparently regarded any collision with a stoic indifference of superior knowledge. American astronomers, who are concentrating on the study of meteors and comets, took it seriously, and the American press discussed the Great Meteor. It was probably a celestial object discovered by Dr. Bader of Bergedorf at the end of October 1924, and pronounced by Greenwich to be a minor planet, which Dr. Crommelin discovered complacently had an orbit that brought it nearer to the Sun than any planet except perhaps Eros. This is in the Morning Post, October the 31st, 1924. Dr. Crommelin may be right, but a strange round cometary object implies something coming towards us, and while the meteor will probably go nearer to the Sun than Eros, it apparently came near to putting a great part of this Earth out of business for a considerable time. As it was, it left behind as a New Year's gift some of its gases which are attracted into our atmosphere. They condensed, and hence the storms and gales. In a word, weather phenomena is involved with other natural phenomena. Gales, hurricanes, typhoons, landslides, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, meteors and comets are all co-related. It is surprising, in view of the millions of educated people to take day to day in every form of science, that these great subjects such as volcanoes and earthquakes, as well as comets and meteors, are allowed to be placed on a shelf. To those who have studied these matters, it is inexplicable that otherwise well-informed people accept without question the archaic ideas produced by supposed authorities, such as that a volcano is thrown up from the Earth's interior, and that an eruption is the escape of molten rock through a fault in the crust. That an earthquake is caused by a contraction of the Earth's crust due to the slowly cooling incandescent mass below, and that comets and meteors are to all intents and purposes harmless. Such was the teaching in the smug Victorian period, and it still survives today in regard to such objects, such as in Herodotus' time. Anyone who said the world was round was likely enough to be boiled alive, or in the time of the popes, prior to the 15th century, anyone who dared assert that there was land on the other side of the Atlantic stood in danger of excommunication. Archaic doctrines long survived the intelligence of the contemporary masses, but sooner or later they must go. Generally, the accepted experts in each branch of learning stick to their last and leave seriously alone other preserves. Weather experts take no account of volcanic eruptions or earthquakes, although both produce heavy rains and cold weather. Volcanoes, in turn, are very closely concerned with earthquakes, and both are inseparable from meteor falls and the meteor streams which intersect the Earth's orbit periodically. Meteors are disintegrated fragments of comets, and those in their turn have a very direct bearing upon natural catastrophes, both great and small, and are the original causes. There is good reason to believe of the vast geological changes which have resulted in the continents and islands, oceans and seas as they are today. It is time there were a revision of all these forms of natural science. In this little work, which does not pretend to be exhaustive or indeed more than suggestive, the writer attempts to indicate an entirely new theory, or indeed return to the very old and classic beliefs on the subject of the creation of the lands and seas on this planet. The key to the true understanding of these matters is contained in a volcano. A volcano, it is suggested, is in reality the residue of another world, the deposit of meteor, which contains all the Earth's ingredients. Volcanoes follow a general law, or rather, meteors obeying an impulse which brings them towards the Earth from the direction of the magnetic pole when they strike the Earth, fall along certain isodynamic lines. Where the lines of volcanoes stretch in any given direction from, say, southeast to northwest, or from east to west, or from north-northeast to south-southwest, as at present is the direction of the ecliptic pole, so at one time that part of the Earth was the position of the then North Pole. The North Pole moves around, of course, by a series of huge dumpings or deposits, by means of tremendous impacts, was age after age built up, and by the linear direction of volcanoes, extinct or alive, can a period prior of the world's history be identified. Such is the theory advanced. It is shown how these meteor deposits, volcanoes, gradually cool and die out like a fire unless they are renovated by other meteor impacts, which may strengthen and increase them, as is the case in many volcanoes. An active volcano, it is pointed out, attracts the wandering meteor, and hence an active volcano in a state of eruption is always a danger to all within its vicinity. Yet all these have their uses. Without volcanoes to draw them in, we should not attract so many meteors, and the Earth would languish and gradually lose its air and sea. We require a new and untrammeled attitude upon these questions of great purport, and in placing this little book in the hands of the public, the author, conscious of its defects, hopes nevertheless that it may be received in its merits and the arguments he advances, he weighed dispassionately, without prejudice. In that event, he would have little cause to fear the result. And there's some thanks, and that was written in March 1925. It just struck me as curious, as they have an extreme weather and people were concerned about it then. That was 100 years ago. So maybe we shouldn't worry quite so much. Try and relax a bit. Anyway, looking forward to the comments. Till the next time. Heddiw.